I'm proud of all my children, except the loser. That was the last thing I heard from my father before I walked out of that family gathering in Dallas. No one stopped me. No one spoke up for me. I remember every nod, every averted glance, and even the half-smirk on my older brother's face as my father said those words. I used to believe family was the one place that would never turn its back on you. I was wrong. But what they didn't expect was that loser from that night wouldn't stay bowed forever. I'm Ethan Miller. And this is the story I'll never forget. The gathering was held at my brother's mansion. He's a well-known surgeon in North Dallas. The place had a big yard, a modern barbecue grill, and a patio large enough for over 30 people to have dinner under soft, golden lights. I hadn't planned on going. Honestly, I hesitated until the very last minute. But part of me still hoped for something, maybe forgiveness, or just to be treated like a normal person in this family. For the past 3 years, I had cut off almost all contact. After a failed business in Arizona, where I poured everything I had into opening an auto repair shop only to be betrayed by my partner, I returned to Texas with nothing, living quietly in a cheap apartment in Fort Worth. I arrived late, and of course, no one noticed. Everyone was busy bragging about their achievements. Jack, the eldest, had just been named top surgeon in the hospital system. Emily, the youngest, was now an HR director in Austin and had just bought a brand new Lexus. I sat at a corner of the table. No one asked what I was doing, where I lived. Maybe they still thought I was a failure, still wandering to find my way back. They weren't wrong, at least not then. Dinner was loud, full of laughter and comparisons. I forced a smile, even though my throat felt tight. It wasn't envy. It was the realization that I didn't exist in that conversation. Then my father stood up to give a toast, and I knew something was coming. He held a glass of red wine and lightly tapped it with a spoon. I want to thank everyone for being here today. Jack, my eldest son, makes me proud every day. Emily, brilliant, independent, knows how to live well. I have amazing children. He paused and turned to me. All eyes followed. Except for one. He knows who he is. Failed in business, borrows money and doesn't repay it, and drags the family name through the mud. I don't even know what to say to people, except one word: failure. The words landed like a slap in the middle of dinner. No one said anything. Not a single reaction. I even saw a few raise their glasses, as if agreeing. I set my utensils down. Got up. Said nothing. I walked out of the patio, past the neatly trimmed lawn, past the row of luxury cars parked along the street. I didn't have a car, I came by Uber. The Dallas night air was chilly, but not as cold as the emptiness swelling inside my chest. That feeling you get when you realize you no longer have a place in your family. Not because of what you did wrong, but because they no longer care to understand or forgive you. I wandered aimlessly, without looking back. No one called after me. Not a single one. And that was the moment I knew I would either forever be the loser in their eyes, or I would make the Miller name remember me in a whole different way. I wandered all night, worn shoes, walking through quiet North Dallas streets. By the time I noticed it was past midnight, I found myself in front of a 24-hour donut shop, the only place open and welcoming me in that silent night. I sat down at an old plastic table, ordered a black coffee, and stared into the rising steam. My mind was a mess of images, childhood memories I thought I had buried long ago. But this time, they didn't just return, they came back with a vengeance. I was born in Fort Worth, into a family of 3 siblings. My mother was a gentle woman who loved books and worked as an accountant for a small office. My father, Frank Miller, was a former soldier who became a warehouse manager for a logistics company. To him, life was all about discipline, rules, and achievements. From an early age, I knew I was different from my siblings. Jack, the eldest, was the kind of son my father always wanted: athletic, straight-A student, full scholarship into medical school. Emily was beautiful, clever, a great student, and always knew how to score points with the adults. Me, I was the kid who liked to daydream, sketch cars, take apart toys, and spend hours watching how machines worked. When I got a B+ in 5th grade math, I was thrilled, thinking my dad would be proud. But he just glanced at my report card and said, "Why isn't it an A?" I once entered a school science fair with a miniature gas station model made from recycled plastic. I spent 2 weeks building it, soldered every piece by hand. When I brought home second place, he only asked, "So who got first?" Those words, harmless as they may sound, repeated over and over through childhood, became like knives stabbing at my fragile self-worth. I don't remember my father ever hugging me, ever saying, "I'm proud of you," or even just, "Well done, Ethan." My mother would try to comfort me. "He just doesn't know how to show it. But he does care about you." I believed my mother. I believed her until the day she died. She passed away 4 years ago, after a sudden stroke. I was the one who took her to the hospital, the one who stayed by her side during her final days. My father was away on a work trip in New Mexico at the time. By the time he arrived, it was too late. He just stood by her hospital bed, holding her cold hand, no tears, no words. After the funeral, he went back to his routine like nothing had happened. From the day she passed, there was no one left to stand between us. And no reason for me to keep forcing a relationship that had always been broken. After the garage in Tucson went under, I once called my father, not to ask for money, just to talk. Just to have someone ask if I was okay. He picked up, stayed silent for a few seconds, then said, "A man needs to know how to stand on his own. Don't expect pity." That call lasted 38 seconds. I never called again. Back in Texas, I lived quietly in a rundown rental complex. I took odd jobs, sometimes helping out at small garages, sometimes doing late-night food deliveries in Fort Worth. I didn't complain. I didn't blame anyone. I just wanted to start over. But that family gathering crushed whatever hope I had left, that maybe, just maybe, my father would see that I was trying to live decently. But no. To him, I was still the middle son, the disappointment, the stain on the Miller family's spotless record. I sat in that donut shop until almost morning. My coffee was cold, my body exhausted, but inside me, something began to stir. Not anger. Not sorrow. Determination. I had survived every fall. I didn't need his approval to have worth. But I would show him that the so-called loser could rise in a way that would make the entire Miller family look twice. After that night, I returned to my small rented apartment in Fort Worth, a studio on the second floor of an old building, with peeling walls and a moldy ceiling. The rent was cheap because the neighbors were loud and no one wanted to be on that street after 9 p.m. I didn't own much, just an old mattress on the floor, a scratched wooden desk, a swivel chair, and my toolbox. It was the only thing I had left after the Tucson failure. I had thought about throwing it all away, but my hands, so used to holding a wrench, kept reminding me, this is what I do best. The next morning, I went back to the old garage where I used to work part-time. The owner, Bernie, a nearly 60-year-old Mexican man with oil-stained hands, looked surprised to see me walk in. "Thought you disappeared, Ethan," he said, his voice rough from years of smoking. I gave a tired smile. "I almost did. But if you've still got space, I'd like to work again." Bernie stared at me for a moment, then nodded toward a Toyota Camry sitting on the lift. "Transmission's making noise. If you can still listen to a car like you used to, get to it." No more words were needed. I changed into my old work shirt, grabbed my tools, and slid under the car. The smell of oil, the sound of metal, that was my rhythm. It felt like coming home. Even if it was just temporary, it made me feel alive again. I worked 6 days a week. Sometimes 7. No insurance, no contract, just a handshake and cash at the end of the day. But I was grateful for the work. Bernie didn't talk much, but he always paid fairly and sometimes handed me a sandwich when he knew I'd skipped lunch. I didn't waste a penny. Every night, I tracked my expenses in an old notebook. How much went to rent, utilities, gas, meals, and a little something for the future fund, which was just a tin can I kept hidden under my bed. 3 months passed. I fixed hundreds of cars. Some nights, I fell asleep on the garage floor from sheer exhaustion. But I didn't feel tired. For the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something right, not for anyone else, but for myself. One day in mid-March, while I was changing a tire on an old Ford, a woman came into the garage. She looked to be in her 40s, dressed simply but neatly. She held a folder and asked Bernie, "I'm looking for someone who can restore a 1967 Chevy Impala. It belonged to my father. I want to give it back to him for his 70th birthday." Bernie pointed toward me. "The guy you're looking for is him, Ethan." I stood up, wiped my hands, and walked over. Her name was Rachel Donovan, a high school teacher. Her father was a Vietnam vet who now lived on the outskirts of Weatherford. The car had been sitting in storage for nearly 20 years, covered in dust, unable to start. But the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dad made me nod without hesitation. "I'll do it. But I'll need time. And, if you don't mind, I'd like to work on it at my place." Rachel seemed unsure at first, but agreed. She left me the address and promised the car would be delivered the following week. That night I couldn't sleep. I hadn't felt excited like that in a long time. This wasn't just a car restoration, it was a chance to prove that I could create something meaningful. Something that mattered. I called Bernie and asked to take a few weeks off. All he said was, "Just don't mess up the car." When the Impala was delivered, I was nearly speechless. It was rusted out, tires cracked, interior rotted, but the frame was still intact. A rough gem buried in a pile of rubble. I started working on it every night after my shifts at the garage. I removed every bolt, scrubbed off every patch of rust, searched for parts through online forums, and asked around old auto shops all over Texas. Sometimes I'd drive over 100 miles just to pick up a single component, but I never hesitated. Whenever I felt myself slowing down, I'd think back to that family gathering. To the way my father said, "Failure." To Jack's eyes. To Emily's shrug. I swore I'd turn this Impala into a masterpiece. Not for their validation. For my own. Every evening, while others were gathered around dinner tables or sprawled on their couches, I'd be alone in that old garage, hunched beneath the dusty '67 Chevy Impala. That car was like my life, worn, scratched, once abandoned. But I saw a soul in it, sleeping, just waiting for someone patient enough to wake it up. I started by tearing out the entire electrical system, rewiring it, repainting the frame, and sanding down every bit of rust. One night, I spent nearly 4 hours just cleaning a tiny rear axle piece. Some nights were freezing, my hands cracked from oil and degreaser. But I didn't stop. One day, while I was struggling with the wheel hub, Rachel showed up. She brought 2 hot coffees and a bag of sandwiches. "You haven't eaten, have you?" she said, setting them down, then looking over the car. "Looks like you're taking this really seriously." I laughed. "I think I need this car as much as your dad does. It keeps me grounded." We sat on an old wooden bench, eating sandwiches and talking about everything: her childhood, her dad's love for classic cars, and why she wanted the Impala restored. "He still sits and looks at it every evening. Calls it a shadow of the past that won't let go. I want to turn it into a gift worthy of what he sacrificed." After that day, Rachel came by more often. Not to check up, just to bring coffee, wipe down interiors, and talk. I was surprised to find myself smiling more. For the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. After nearly 2 months, the Impala started to come back to life. A fresh coat of black paint gleamed. The headlights worked. The engine purred on the first ignition. I played Elvis through the old stereo system, standing in the middle of the garage, grinning like a kid. Rachel stood beside me, eyes shining. "I can't believe it, you really did it." "I never doubted it," I said, catching my own reflection in the rearview mirror. "For the first time in years, I'm proud of something." We took it for a test drive out to Grapevine Lake Park. The evening sun hit the polished hood, reflecting like a new mirror. People turned to look as we drove by. Rachel beamed. My dad's going to cry. Maybe he won't be the only one, I muttered, thinking of my mom, the only person who ever truly believed in me. That night, after returning the car to the garage, Rachel hesitantly handed me a paper. My friend works with a vintage car showcase group in Dallas. They're holding a small event at the end of the month. I signed you up. I blinked. What? Ethan, this car isn't just for my dad. It deserves to be seen. And so do you. I think it's time you step out of the shadow your family cast over you. I looked at the paper in my hand, the words, Ethan Miller, Custom Restoration, printed clearly on the list. My heart pounded. No one had believed in me like this, except Mom. And now Rachel. I said yes. For the next 2 weeks, I treated the Impala like a treasure. Polished every detail, tuned the speakers, mounted a new chrome logo I bought from a specialty store in Oklahoma. I taped a small note to the dashboard. Never let anyone define you, when you're still writing your own story. The day of the car show arrived with a warm summer breeze. I drove the Impala into the display area, among more than 30 vintage cars, Mustangs, 69 Chargers, Cadillacs from the 50s. But I didn't feel small. I'd spent a lifetime in others' shadows. Now, I just wanted to stand in the sunlight. Rachel came, wearing a pale blue dress and carrying her dad's old film camera. We both grinned when someone asked, You restored this? It's stunning. Which garage do you work at? I replied. Ethan Miller Restoration. Just one guy. But enough to bring this car back to life. In the late afternoon, as the sun was fading, someone tapped me on the shoulder. Do you take on custom restoration work? I have a Pontiac Tempest, been sitting in the dust just like this one. I froze. A real offer. I turned to Rachel. She didn't say anything, just gave a small nod. I clenched my fist. Turns out, dreams don't die. They just wait for someone patient enough to call their name. After the vintage car showcase in Dallas, everything seemed to change so quickly that it took me a few days to believe it wasn't just a dream. In the first week alone, I received 3 restoration requests: a 1965 Pontiac Tempest, a beaten-up Buick Riviera that had sat in storage for 2 decades, and even a 1968 Mustang Fastback, the exact model I once dreamed of in high school. I worked nonstop. Days helping Bernie at the old garage, nights buried in blueprints, ordering parts through online groups, emailing clients, and most importantly, planning to open my own restoration shop. Rachel was the first to offer help, sorting paperwork, scouting locations. One Saturday evening, we sat together in a small cafe in Fort Worth, and she slid her laptop toward me. I found an old warehouse near the Riverbend gas station. Not too big, but enough to start. Rent's decent, and the owner's easygoing. Want to check it out? I looked at the map, feeling something stir in my chest. For years, I'd just been getting by, never even considered the idea of starting something of my own. You sure I should do this? I asked, half joking. Rachel smiled. Ethan, no one turns scrap into a masterpiece unless they believe in themselves. I believe. And you should too. We visited the warehouse the next day. The paint was peeling, parts of the roof leaked, but somehow, it felt right. I saw it as a reflection of myself when I started, worn down, scratched up, but still worth something if given a chance. I put down the deposit. A week later, I officially left Bernie's garage. He simply patted my shoulder and nodded. You've always fixed cars with your ears and your heart. Now go fix your life, Ethan. I named the shop Iron Revival Garage, reviving through iron and steel. The first sign I painted myself, crooked and uneven, but it was real. It was mine. Opening day had no wine, no VIPs. Just Rachel, Bernie, my first 2 clients, and a radio playing. A change is gonna come. But just as I was about to close up that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard you were at the Dallas car show. Call me when you can. Dad? I stood frozen. The word Dad, I didn't even have that number saved. In fact, I'd blocked him after that family gathering over a year ago. The anger hadn't faded. I could still see his eyes that day, hear the cold steel in his voice when he told the whole family I was the only failure. I didn't reply right away. I left the message sitting there for a week, opening it each night before bed, then locking my phone again. Rachel was the first to notice. You going to call him? She asked one evening as we cleaned the shop after a busy day. I hesitated. I don't know. I'm scared. What if he still thinks the same? What if it's just a test? Rachel looked at me for a long time, then placed her hand gently on my shoulder. If you call, it might hurt. But if you don't, you'll never know how far you've come. Call, not for him. For you. That night, after she left, I sat alone in the small office, phone trembling in my hand. Finally, I hit call. 3 rings. Then a familiar voice, older, more tired, but still his. Ethan? It's me, I said quietly. Thank you for calling. He paused. I know there's nothing I can say to undo what I said before. I was wrong. I misjudged you. I said nothing. My heart pounded. I was in Dallas last week for work. Someone showed me photos of the car you restored. I couldn't believe it. I was wrong about you, Ethan. You're not a failure. You never were. I leaned back in my chair, eyes stinging. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't revenge. It was a door that had slammed shut suddenly opening again, just because I stayed long enough to knock. I didn't sleep that night. But not from sorrow. This time, it was because I knew I was on the right path. 2 weeks after the call with my father, I received a letter, not an email, but an actual handwritten letter, in the familiar handwriting of Aunt Mary, my dad's younger sister. It was an invitation to attend the one-year memorial of my grandmother, the only person in the family who still checked in on me after everything fell apart. I hesitated. For a long time. Rachel noticed me holding the letter for hours, eyes fixed on the words. We are always family, no matter what happened, Ethan. You should go, she said softly. Not to seek validation, but to prove that you don't need it anymore. I nodded. That day, I drove the Impala, the first car that marked the beginning of my revival, back to Plano, the city I grew up in. The sky was a dull gray, but my heart wasn't as heavy as it once was. I was ready. The service was held at the small church where my grandmother used to sing in the choir. As I walked in, old faces turned toward me. A few surprised looks. Some quiet whispers. My father stood near the white flower altar, alongside my brothers, Mike, David, and my older sister, Beth. All 3 had stayed silent when our father humiliated me in front of the extended family. All 3 had ignored my messages for over 2 years. Mike frowned when he saw me. He whispered something to David, then walked over. Ethan, I didn't think you'd show up, I replied calmly. I came to honor Grandma, not to be welcomed. He paused. No smug grin like before. I could sense it, something had shifted. Later, my father approached. His eyes held caution and a trace of remorse. Thank you for coming. She would be happy. I nodded, saying nothing more. I didn't need an apology. I just wanted to close this chapter standing tall. After the service, the family gathered at Beth's house, once our childhood playground, now filled with plaques and awards, David's military medals, Mike's MBA diploma, Beth's nonprofit certificates. I stood quietly in a corner, holding a drink. Then, suddenly, Mike's voice behind me. Heard you opened a repair shop? I turned around. His expression was half curious, half dismissive. Restoring vintage cars. And some custom interior work by request. David chimed in. Still messing with that stuff? Thought it was just one of those hobbies you dropped in college. I didn't respond. But this time, not out of fear or shame. I just realized they were the ones being left behind. My father stepped in, saying quietly, "Ethan's been invited to the Vintage Car Expo in Houston next month. He's restoring a 1966 GTO for a collector in Florida." The room went silent. Mike gave a dry chuckle. "A GTO? You serious?" "I am," I said. "And I don't need your belief. I came to say goodbye to the only one in this family who ever called me someone who mattered." Silence again. I looked at each of them, every person who once made me feel like I didn't belong. "I'm not perfect. But I've rebuilt my life. No awards. No applause. Just a screwdriver, a little faith, and one person who didn't leave me when everything fell apart." I left the gathering right after. No handshakes. No goodbyes. But just as I stepped outside the gate, my father called out, "Ethan!" I stopped. He was out of breath, hands trembling. "I can't undo the past. But if you'll let me, I want to fix what's left." I looked at him, not with anger, but with the kind of maturity I'd never felt before in front of my father. "I don't need you to change the past. Just don't repeat it." 3 months after my grandmother's memorial, I stood in the middle of a vintage car showcase in Houston, Texas. The midday sun poured through the curved canopies, gleaming off polished frames, and hundreds of cowboy hats lifted in admiration. The 1966 Pontiac GTO I had restored sat in the center, fiery red, with razor-sharp curves and hand-stitched leather interiors. A group of collectors from Florida, Georgia, and California took turns asking questions, snapping photos, and handing over business cards. Some even offered long-term collaboration. But I didn't need fame. What I felt wasn't glory. It was worthiness. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from my own name. Rachel stood in the distance, smiling, saying nothing, but her eyes told me everything. I hadn't let anyone down. Not her. Not myself. That afternoon, as the crowd began to leave, an older man approached. I recognized him, a journalist who used to write about vintage cars in American Steel magazine. He stared at the GTO for a long while, then asked, "You're Ethan Clark, right?" "Yes, sir. I've heard a few folks mention Iron Revival Garage. Would you be interested in letting me write about your journey?" I paused for a second. Not out of surprise, but because, in that moment, I remembered the last time someone said my name in public, without laughter following it. I nodded. "I'm nothing special. I just lost a few times, then learned how not to stay stuck in the mud." The journalist smiled and scribbled a few lines. "Sometimes the greatest people are the ones who didn't need to win from the start." 2 months later, the article titled "From Failure to Forging Steel" was featured on the cover of American Steel magazine. They photographed me standing beside the GTO, arms crossed, with the rusty Iron Revival Garage sign in the background. That day, I received hundreds of messages from customers across the country. One vocational school in Oklahoma even reached out, asking if I could come speak to students, most of them training in auto repair, many of them on the verge of quitting because they didn't believe in themselves. I agreed. At the first talk, I stood in front of more than 50 young men, some with messy hair, some tattooed, some staring at the ground like they'd only ever heard the word useless their whole lives. I told them about that family gathering. About the words, "I'm proud of all my children, except the failure." I told them about holding greasy gloves while my hands trembled with shame. About crying under a car at night, thinking I'd never amount to anything. Then I said, "But I realize something. Only one person gets to define who you are, you. If you believe you're trash, you'll live like trash. But if you believe you can be different, then a wrench, a broken down car, or even a hot summer day can be the beginning of something new." After the talk, a student walked up to me. He didn't say anything, just showed me his hands, calloused, cracked, then smiled and said one thing. "I'm gonna keep fixing." "Thank you." 1 year after opening the shop, I held a small anniversary gathering. Nothing fancy. Just a few loyal clients, Rachel, Mr. Burney, and most unexpectedly, my father. He stood in a corner of the shop, his eyes no longer as stern as before. "Thank you for letting me be here today." I nodded. He pulled out a wooden box. Inside was an old wrench, the handle engraved with "To Ethan, the son I'm proud of." I gripped it tightly. In that moment, I understood something. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means giving yourself the right to move forward without carrying the weight. And no matter what the world once called me, now I was Ethan Clark, the man who rebuilt not just vintage cars, but his own life with his own hands. My father nodded slowly. For the first time, I didn't see him as a powerful man, but as a father, learning how to start over. I got in my car and drove off into the late afternoon. No bitterness. Just a lightness, like I had laid the final stone on a brand new foundation. Sometimes it's the harshest words that become the drive to prove your true worth. Ethan was once called a failure by his own father in front of the entire family. But instead of breaking, he quietly rose, rebuilding his life with his own hands and relentless faith. His success didn't come from others' approval, it came from his decision not to give up. Ethan's story is a reminder: your past doesn't define who you are. How you rise after the pain does. What do you think of Ethan's journey? Have you ever felt misunderstood like he did? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, real-life stories and heartfelt lessons about family.